Right now, somewhere on the internet, a video is being uploaded by someone. And within seconds, a system that is entirely automated, proprietary, and accountable to no one decides what to do with it. Sometimes it decides no one else should see it and simply stops it right there and then. But for the vast majority of videos, they don't go very far. But if it did go forward, it wasn't necessarily because millions of people were looking for it, but because a machine decided they should see it in their browse feature or their news feed. That system that decided is what we call an algorithm. And for most people, that word might sound technical and boring, but it definitely isn't. In essence, it's an automated editorial system. Just like a newspaper editor choosing what stories to put in and which ones to leave out, the algorithm chooses which videos to show and which ones to bury. The vast majority of digital videos and news you consume are delivered through these algorithmic recommendation systems. You think you're choosing what to read or watch, but in reality, you're often just choosing the most attractive thumbnail or headline that the algorithm limited you to. And here's what makes this both remarkable and frightening. The vast majority of people have no idea this is their world now. And I'm not exaggerating. It's actually, in a way, a literal sense because Americans now spend most of their waking lives on a corporation's platform. And those that do know what's happening mistakenly believe the algorithms that are being used on them are somehow neutral in what they emphasize and promote. This episode is about how that system was built, who controls it, and what it's doing to the way all of us understand the world around us. By the end of this video, the next time you open a social media app or a media platform, you'll understand why your attention isn't fully yours, and how the world that you see is mostly the world the algorithm shows you. The world before the feed. So let's take a moment and think back to a world before social media had a newsfeed. And you know what that newsfeed is, right? That horizontal stack of posts that results in a scroll downward that never leads to an end. To a time before there was a stream of content waiting for you every time you opened an app. The internet that most people first encountered was a place you had to navigate. You went somewhere specific. You typed in an address or you clicked a link and you arrived at a page that someone had built. The page stayed where it was. It wasn't part of a giant conglomerate. It didn't come to you either. It was an experience you controlled and you navigated deliberately. When the first social networks emerged, they worked the same way. If you wanted to know what someone was up to on MySpace, you went to their page. You clicked on their profile, you read what they posted, and the order they posted it. The platform was what engineers call a pipe, which is a conduit that connected you to other people and then got out of the way. It didn't have an opinion about what you should see first. It allowed for individuals to create pages and then connect themselves. Facebook launched in 2004, and for the first 2 years, it worked pretty much the same way. If you wanted to see what your friends were doing, you visited their profiles where they posted on their wall. That changed in September 2006. That's when Facebook introduced what it called the news feed. Suddenly, instead of visiting individual profiles, everything your friends did flowed to you automatically in a single, continuously updating stream. The updates, though, came to you with it still organized in chronological order. The chronological part is key here. The original newsfeed shows you what your friends posted in the order they posted it. The most recent post was at the top. The oldest was at the bottom. If you scrolled far enough, you'd see everything. There was no real ranking or weighting. A post from your closest friend had the same priority as a post from someone you'd met once at a party. A photo had the same weight as a link to a news article. The platform didn't make judgments on the content. It simply showed you what existed in the sequence it appeared. But this system didn't last long because it had a problem. And their problem wasn't necessarily you keeping up with your friend's social life. Social ads. By 2007, Facebook had figured out how to make money. The mechanism was called social ads. When your friend joined a brand's group or became a fan of a movie, that action appeared in your news feed as a line of text. John is now a fan of The Dark Knight, or whatever movie it was. Advertisers paid to guarantee that when someone interacted with their brand, that interaction would show up in the feeds of that person's friends. It basically broadcast your friend's action to you and the world, and especially if the action was linked to someone paying for that broadcast. But there was a matter of time. Because the feed was strictly chronological, that sponsored action appeared where it belonged in the timeline. So suppose your friend liked the page of a new movie at 2 p.m. If you logged in at 2:05, you were almost certain to see it. It was recent and you didn't have to scroll very far to encounter it. If you logged in at 7 p.m., however, it was buried under 5 hours of other people's posts and actions. Facebook had sold advertisers the right to be in your feed, but it couldn't control whether you'd actually be looking when the moment arrived. With this setup, revenue was hostage to timing. If your friends hadn't interacted with a brand recently, your feed was ad-free because of when you logged in. And when friends had interacted with brands and you logged in too late, those paid placements were gone. So what did Facebook do? They turned the surveillance volume up to 11. Some of you probably get that reference. And they did it with a program called Beacon. Instead of waiting for your friends to interact with brands organically on the site, Beacon pulled users' activity from outside Facebook. These were things like purchases and rentals and searches on partner websites. And then they published them into feeds automatically. You bought a book on an online bookseller? Your friends would know. You rented a movie from a rental place? Well, that showed up too. The advertiser got guaranteed placement. The clock problem was solved. But there was quite the backlash, since this basically was, surveillance. Mark Zuckerberg said it was a mistake. Beacon was scaled back and then quietly killed. But the lesson Facebook seems to have taken from Beacon's failure didn't seem to be about them going too far. The lesson they took from it, as it seems from their subsequent behavior, is that they were too blatant regarding the surveillance. Through Beacon, users got a glimpse behind the curtain. They saw what was being collected and how some of it was being used, and it horrified them. So changes were made with the surveillance taking a different form. In 2009, Facebook introduced the first version of what would become known as EdgeRank. It was an algorithm that supposedly scored every piece of content using 3 variables: how close you were to the person who posted it, what type of content it was, and how old the content was. Multiply those numbers together and you got a score. The highest scores rose to the top, supposedly. The official explanation was user experience. There was simply too much content, they said, and people needed help sorting through it all. But based on user reactions, people didn't seem to want a middleman to sort through their content. They chose through their follows and their likes what they wanted to see, and they would go see it if they wanted to. Facebook basically said, like it or leave it, and, most people stayed. Why? Because, there was not much of an alternative. But perhaps the content overload problem wasn't the problem Facebook was solving anyway. And of course, there was reason for Facebook to want this change to occur, because information overload wasn't the problem Facebook was trying to solve, at least not based on what they focused on in terms of their quarterly reports. With EdgeRank, Facebook had freedom to do something that it had difficulty doing before. It could take a post from hours ago or even possibly a day or so ago and put it at the top of your feed. It could hold a piece of content in reserve and surface it at the moment you were most likely to engage with it. Time really didn't matter anymore. In its place was a system that decided what you saw based on signals that served the platform's interests. The numbers confirmed what the structural change did. Once the feed was algorithmic and the platform controlled what rose and what was buried, an ad placed inside that feed was worth dramatically more than any of the banner or sidebar ads that were the revenue generators previously. The platform had solved its timing problem, but the solution resulted in something larger than a technical fix. It turned the social media platform from a simple connector among friends into one that looks more like a publisher with editorial control over what content makes the news and what gets cut out of the coverage entirely. The official story about why this happened seemed to always focus on you. Too much content. There's information overload. The algorithm is simply there to help. But the history says something different. Facebook didn't seem to just build the algorithm to improve your experience. It built the algorithm because without it, it couldn't guarantee delivery of the product it was selling. And the product it was selling was your attention. The algorithm was designed to get your attention and to focus your attention on what it wanted to show you. The algorithm spreads. After Facebook, the next platform to turn to the algorithm model was Instagram. And that shift happened, because of Facebook. Facebook bought Instagram in 2012. By the middle of 2016, Instagram was using algorithms to determine what to show users and when. Also in that same year, 2016, Twitter moved to the algorithm as well. Twitter, of all things, was built by being a real-time notification platform, but it changed to an algorithmic process for determining what updates got shown in the feed and what got buried. But it wasn't just tweets or pictures. That same year, again, 2016, has a major change in how people saw videos as well. For mobile, YouTube announced a redesigned Home tab in April 2016 for iPhones and Android. The company said the app would open to a redesigned home with a cleaner format. And most crucially, better recommendations. Instead of a bunch of videos grouped by channel or topic, users would see a single feed of recommended videos on their homepage. YouTube also said the new recommendation system used deep neural network technology that could find patterns automatically. In other words, they're using algorithms just like Facebook and Instagram. But, as they described it, seems fancier, right? And it was so fancy, the creators of those algorithms couldn't really explain too much about how it worked. This, of course, impacts people that go on YouTube today because a lot of times the algorithm will decide to push someone off the platform. There are a lot of reports from people that post on YouTube about their videos being kicked off by the algorithm with no explanation whatsoever. And when they try to reach out to a human, and even that response doesn't explain exactly what happened. So by the end of summer 2016, the transformation across text, picture, and video platforms was pretty much complete. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, nearly every major platform where Americans gathered to share information, consume media, and talk to each other had created complicated and opaque systems deciding what users saw and when they saw it. A lot of people just pointed to the money aspect. Outsiders said it was to show more ads and result in more spending by users. But as the next part of the story shows, when you shape what people see and think about, you shape more than just their spending habits. The prelude to 2016. So as we saw in the last section, all the top social media platforms across all media categories switched from a pipe model to a filter model by the summer of 2016. The filter being a mathematical formula that is proprietary, deciding what you see instead of a simple delivery model based on the time those connected to you posted. This setup became used as a political weapon run by foreign interests for the year's biggest event in America, the 2016 presidential and general elections. The information I'm about to cover is vital to understanding how foreign interests, both commercial and political, are working to shape Americans' opinions every day. And obviously, they don't have America's interests in mind when they do this. The 2016 story involves two foreign interests, a British political consulting firm and Russian intelligence entities. We'll focus on the British political consulting firm first. Everyone talked about Cambridge Analytica in 2016, but that was just a subsidiary for a group called Strategic Communication Laboratories, or SCL. And SCL didn't get their start in American elections in 2016. They seem to have started their work in America around late 2012. That year, 2012, is a key year in our earlier discussion since that was the same year that Facebook fully transitioned to the algorithmic feed model. And that algorithmic transition, with Facebook and the others coming later, all by 2016 allowed the messages that were injected by these foreign interests to magnify and amplify way more than it would have had social media stayed the way it was before the algorithmic change. News reports have SCL doing its first active political campaign work in the U.S. in 2013 in Virginia for a conservative political action committee group during that year's governor's race. It rebranded its U.S. operations that same year under the name Cambridge Analytica. And it was active in numerous campaigns during the 2014 election cycle, working for a number of Republican Senate campaigns. To provide context, later reports from former employees described the split between SCL and Cambridge Analytica was basically name only. Apparently, they set up a Delaware LLC under the Cambridge Analytica name after initially starting in America under the SCL name. So the way I see it, practically speaking, Cambridge Analytica and SCL are pretty much one entity. SCL had worked in what is often called psychological operations, which involves using various elements in messaging in order to shift a person's behavior, and with some of those elements in messaging involving outright deception. Now, it's easy to try to make this whole thing a political party issue or an ideological issue. In this instance, you see SCL linking very closely with conservative groups and the Republican Party. But it's not that simple, since reports came out later that SCL also approached Democratic campaign figures in 2012, but the Democrats reportedly rebuffed them. So if those reports are true, then SCL seems more like a mercenary type group rather than an ideologically aligned group, meaning they'll basically work for whoever pays them. But it's the foreign element that concerns me most since SCL had worked But it's the foreign element that is most concerning since SCL had worked and had relationships beyond just the UK. The ties through Cambridge Analytica went farther east than London. The 2016 election. So by mid-2016, every major platform had handed editorial control of your feed to an algorithm optimized for engagement, supposedly. And right at that moment, two separate foreign operations were ready to exploit exactly that system. One was a private British psychological operations firm. The other was a state-sponsored Russian troll factory. They were not formally coordinating with each other, as far as we know, but there were connections with Cambridge Analytica in Russia that did eventually come out. So let's start with what was actually coming up in people's feeds. Multiple sources found the Internet Research Agency, operating out of St. Petersburg, Russia, ran a campaign internally called Information Warfare, using accounts across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and other platforms. The operation began as a general effort to undermine the U.S. electoral system. The scale was staggering. Russian-controlled Facebook accounts made over 80,000 posts before being deactivated in August 2017. And those posts reached at least 29 million Americans, with estimates suggesting the content may have reached as many as 126 million people. By 2016, the Russian-based operation was deploying between 400 and 1,000 hired civilian trolls working in shifts, posting online comments, tweets, blog posts, and other content around the clock. And the surprising thing? Most of what they were posting about wasn't obviously political. Only a minority of the IRA's content was directly election-related. Their primary focus was divisive content around race relations, immigration, and other issues already fracturing American society. They were simultaneously trying to influence your vote and your view of America. The accounts they built were designed to look and feel like real American community pages. They had names like Secured Borders, Heart of Texas, and Back the Badge. They accumulated real followers over months and years before deploying them. Some of these Russian-based accounts went further and impersonated local news outlets, using Twitter handles like Atlanta Online or Kansas Daily News. And they tweeted out links to real local news stories to establish credibility before mixing in disinformation. They were exploiting the fact that Americans trust their local news more than national sources, and they built fake local news sources to look like the real thing. The Heart of Texas Facebook group, run from Russia, organized actual real-world rallies in November 2016 around the theme of Texas seceding from the United States if Hillary Clinton won the election. And people showed up. The remotely organized rallies, demonstrations, and protests in New York, Pennsylvania, and other states used fake email accounts, Facebook ads, and fake Instagram accounts to promote the events. And in some cases, the Russian-based operation organized both a protest and a counter-protest simultaneously, with the seemingly obvious goal of stoking confrontation between two sides. Foreign nationals working in a building in St. Petersburg were moving Americans around like pieces on a board. On Twitter, Russian bots were hard at work there too. The most retweeted Russian account during this period was @10GOP, which masqueraded as a Tennessee Republican group. And it was retweeted by, among others, Donald Trump himself, the Washington Post, comedian Sarah Silverman, and Twitter's own CEO, Jack Dorsey. The Russia connection. Now, the Russia connection. Cambridge Analytica and its leaders publicly denied any contact with Russian entities. That turned out to not look to be true. And then there's the data. Cambridge Analytica received a large quantity of data harvested from Facebook by an individual who was a Russian-American professor who had received a grant from the Russian government. The U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee, in its bipartisan report, stated Cambridge Analytica had a degree of intersection with and proximity to Russia, and specifically Russia's intelligence services. So here's what we know. Both were using the same algorithmic platforms, the same targeting methods, and the same psychological playbook during the same election. The algorithm amplified both of them just the same. And at least from my assessment, it seems the foreign interests at play would have thought it a success no matter who won the 2016 election. Cambridge Analytica would get paid with not only millions in fees, but also with the raw data of Americans' behavior that they could use in the next election. And for Russia and whoever else might have been involved from abroad, the fact that Americans became angry at each other and more suspicious of each other would have been a victory no matter who walked into the White House on January 20th, 2017. As for the social media platforms themselves, Facebook and others received millions of dollars in ad revenue from all the attention and viral sharing of the foreign messages that were being injected from afar. And it's simply going to be difficult to almost impossible to counter these types of bad behaviors aimed at America and Americans if we as Americans don't stop looking at the person across the street as an outsider simply because they might have an R or a D by their registration card. The China question. Here's where the story gets considerably more uncomfortable, if it couldn't be uncomfortable already. TikTok is owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance. You may be thinking that it was sold recently, and you're right. And you're right, at least partially, because only part of the company was sold. Chinese interests still own nearly 20% of TikTok. You have some American firms owning another chunk, yes, but in addition to China still holding onto a chunk, you also have other countries now included in the deal as well. So did the sale really change very much? Well, I guess it expanded the number of countries that now have access to the data. But we'll focus on the Chinese angle to all of this to keep it simple, since that by itself presents the cautionary tale about giving your social space up to outside corporations and interests. And the best way to look at this is actually to see what China does for itself, to actually look at what China does in its own country with its social platform and what it does in other countries. So in China, ByteDance operates a separate but nearly identical product called Douyin. I really don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, so don't hold me to it. It has the same basic technology and algorithmic architecture as TikTok, but the reality on that platform is completely different than the one on the American version. In China, the regular adult version of the platform, Douyin, serves its users content that is skill-based, educational, and productively entertaining. Content such as cooking techniques and professional skills, science and fitness, cultural content, things that, when you put the phone down, left you with something. Douyin's top-performing content tends to be educational, something that goes beyond just mindless entertainment. In America, the algorithm serves you the blackout challenge. That's not a metaphor. That's a literal description of what TikTok's algorithm did. It identified content where users were choking themselves unconscious. Notice that people were watching it and served it to more people. TikTok pushed dangerous and shocking content seemingly relentlessly across American screens. The list of dangerous challenges are seemingly endless to include things like the fire challenge or the hot water challenge. I mean, come on, those are medieval ordeals. And yet we allow foreign interests to push that type of stuff to Americans while simultaneously making money off of it from ads from those views. It's basically a self-funding social destabilization machine disguised as a social network. And Americans aren't the only ones who notice what's going on. Notice the difference. French President Emmanuel Macron framed it bluntly in his speech to European lawmakers. China has understood that we are in the middle of a cognitive war. And he spoke further about the strategy being to export what dulls young minds while keeping what makes young people more intelligent for its own population. But regardless of what you call it, the social networks will simply say it's not their fault. It's just an algorithm, just eyes on a screen. But as we've covered, that has consequences in the real world.